Привет, moi druzy. Hello, my friends. I'm glad to be back. I'm sorry for the delay. Today is day 336. I want to talk about two items and two items only. I want to talk about sending tanks. Germany's going to be sending tanks. The U.S. is about to commit to it, and we'll talk about all of what's going on there. And I want to talk about rooting out corruption in Ukraine and why it's important and what's being done and how this will hopefully prevent much worse damage from happening because of corruption. Okay, here we go. So we're going to start with the British Ministry of Defense, and they were talking about Russian tanks, and they said that Russia has worked to prepare a small number of T-14 Armata main battle tanks, and I talked about this last week before I took the break, and these tanks are actually pretty bad. They're some of their newest tanks, but it said this: deployed Russian forces were reluctant to accept the first tranche of T-14 allocated to them because the vehicles were in such poor condition. And it goes on and says Sergei Shoigu described the planned production run for 2022 as only an experimental industrial batch. So these are not going to be any game changers. Now, on the other side, here's Olaf Scholz, and Olaf is I think he's crossed that bridge now where he's sending German tanks. Now, why these German Leopard 2? Because these are the most common tanks on the battlefield, and if you can learn on one system rather than multiple systems, it's better for Ukraine to be able to provide a supply chain and be able to do other things along those lines. So the decision follows our well-known line of supporting Ukraine to the best of our abilities, Scholz says. So they're going to be doing what? Sending 14, that's a company of Leopard 2 A6 battle tanks. So they're finally choosing that they're going to do that. Here's the ISW talking about the same thing. Coalition of NATO members states reportedly will send Ukraine modern battle tanks. Biden is preparing to send a significant number of Abrams M1 tanks. So Biden's planning to send 30 or more Abrams tanks. German newspaper Der Spiegel reported on January 24th, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz decided to deliver at least one tank company. That's 14 tanks. So 14, and then you have the Polish 14, and then you have the British 14, and eventually that starts to add up, right? So that's 42. Then you add the 30 that the U.S. will be sending shortly, or 30 or more, so that's 72. Then you add Bradley fighting vehicles to that. They're not tanks, but they can do some damage, which is another, say, 50 or so, something in that neighborhood, and so it starts to add up. Now, this is short of the Ukrainian commander Valery Zaluzhnyi's previously emphasized in December 22, Ukraine needs 300 main battle tanks, but it'll start to build and they'll start to get those things that they need. That, with the technologically advanced weaponry that they're getting from the U.S., should help even the odds. So this is the Leopard 2 tank. Here's some background about it. It can go about 311 miles. It runs on diesel. The problem with the Abrams tanks is that they run on jet fuel, not diesel, so they have to have a different supply chain. So you can go 68 kilometers per hour or 42 miles per hour. Now, the Ukrainians need it because they have an urgent need for heavy armor to counter Russia's heavy armor. Moscow intends to launch a significant new offensive in the coming months, and the Ukrainians want to be prepared. Germany has 321 in use and another 200 in inventory, so 14 isn't asking all that much. But as each country starts to supply some of these tanks, we'll start to see it add up and add up and add up. Here's the Russian response. Germany greenlights Leopard tanks for Ukraine. This article didn't say anything we didn't already say. Here's the Pravda response. Russia's T-90 breakthrough tank is superior to the German Leopard tank. And it's apparently also, according to this, superior to the Abrams tank. And of course, they're going to say that kind of thing. I'm not an expert. I doubt that that's true, only because it's Pravda. And I know, call me skeptical, but I'm not a military expert. I would urge you to listen to other experts who have some real sense of this, because that's not my strength. At the same time, Pravda is also saying Russia unveils consequences of U.S. tank supplies to Ukraine breathlessly. And Antonov called possible supplies of Abrams tanks to the Ukraine a blatant provocation against Russia. All Abrams tanks would have to be destroyed. Well, okay, if all Abrams have to be destroyed, come and take. Right? Let's see you do it. a little bit more now. The Biden administration is planning to send some battle tanks. And again, there's going to be more than 30 of its frontline battle tanks to Ukraine. And that was to kind of soften up German resistance, among other things. The Pentagon has resisted sending the tanks, citing the heavy maintenance that they require, as well as their need for jet fuel, as I talked about a little bit earlier. Now, what is behind this divide? Now, I talked about a couple of factors. One could just be political leanings, like friendly feelings toward Russia from parts of Germany. Remember, Germany and Russia were very commingled in East Germany for some time. There could also be that German businessmen are looking to that future day where they could do business in Germany. But there's something more to the story, and this came out yesterday in the Atlantic Council. Two schools of thought have emerged in Ukraine. And by the way, I think that this is actually really helpful. The first is held by the Baltics, Nordics, Poland, and other Eastern European states, and it's the belief that Russia needs to be decisively defeated militarily. They are hyper aware of it, like the Lithuanians, the Poles. They realize what it was like. They remember what it was like to be under that Soviet domination. The second school of thought, held by Germany, France, and Southern European states, and to an extent to Washington, seeks to avoid escalation in the belief that Putin, cornered and in decline, could lead to uncontrollable developments. What they mean is that Putin is actually deterring these states from sending more munitions, and that's a terrible place to be. But there's a little bit more to the story. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been speaking about going back to the old order with Russia. And what he means by that is like, look, Russia's not going away. They're not going to evaporate. We're going to have to do business with them sometime again in the future. So I think holding that perspective is helpful, but it's also hurting by not precluding you from doing the things that you need to do now while people are suffering and dying in Ukraine. While Eastern European countries hear such statements, they believe that Germany does not understand what's at stake, like the Poles do, like the Lithuanians do, the Estonians. This divide has resulted in consequences for relations between Berlin and its Eastern and Northern European neighbors. And I think that helps us understand some of the divide. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about the corruption scandals that have been here lately. The Director of Procurement in the Department of the Ministry of Defense and some others with the purchase of food for military personnel, they've been grafting. They've been, saying we're getting it at this price when they're really not, and then they're taking a cut off of it. Together with colleagues, we're going to check the prices, says the Anti-Corruption Policy Committee. We're going to check these prices. The Ministry of Defense reported that they found errors in the contracts and they're undergoing, to correct them. Now, this could be really, really bad. Now, here's another article. Ukraine's Deputy Infrastructure Minister, Zelenskyy, has been detained and dismissed from his post for allegedly stealing $400,000 intended for purchasing aid, including generators, according to Ukraine's anti-corruption detectives and prosecutors. Now, this is bad on so many levels, okay? On one level, corruption is bad. On a second level, it's worse because people could be dying. On a third level, it's even worse because you can now arm opponents. RT and Pravda are going to be making hay about this. In the United States, isolationists will say, see, we can't even give this money because it's going to corruption. It's not even going to the battlefield like we want it to go to, right? That's the kind of thing that'll happen. And on so many levels. And then strategically, you could actually put yourself in a position where you're more likely to lose because you're hurting yourself. It's an unforced error, and they have to root this out. Now, Zelenskyy said, I want this to be clear. There will be no return to what used to be in the past, to the way various people close to the state institutions or those who spent their entire lives chasing a chair, a state position, used to live. He said this in his nightly address the other day. Zelenskyy was detained on Saturday. Anti-corruption investigators. He had $38,000 in cash. Like what? Who has $38,000 in cash just sitting around? Like, especially if you work for the state, like, something's not right. Before the war, corruption scandals were almost a daily feature of Ukrainian political life. The country was ranked 122 out of 180, which is pretty bad. Russia's a little bit worse. But, I mean, the whole neighborhood's got some issues. Since the war, there have been far fewer known instances of corruption, right? Crises tend to unite us and cause us to stop doing stupid stuff. Like, remember on 9/11, the congressmen all outside the Capitol building singing God Bless America? Yeah, a crisis focuses us and makes us stop saying, you're bad, no, you're bad, no, you're bad, no, that's bad. Right? So it's tamped it down some, but they've really have to get away from this. Pavlo Hamilton, deputy head of Zelensky's party, named after the TV show Servant of the People, was also dismissed on Monday because of corruption. The head of the party, David R. Karmia, said, if you are an MP and have few million extra hryvnias, then you should help your country. This is your duty. Defense Minister Reznikov also found himself in the spotlight this week after another Ukrainian publication published an investigation into the food procurement by the Defense Ministry. Now, I don't know that Reznikov has done anything wrong, but think about the strategic importance of what would happen if he was taken off the battlefield, if he was taken out of the picture. He's been very competent in many ways in conducting this war. If he's taken out, that's a huge win for Russia. Don't help the other side win. Along with those officials, a number of prosecutors were relieved of their duties because of corruption as well. So they're rooting this out, and they're doing it in a big way and in a hurry. And to their credit, they're rooting it out rather than just kind of glossing it over and saying, no, this is a war. We just got to keep going. No, they're getting this. So you have to keep your allies with you, and unless you root this out, you stand a real chance of losing their sympathy and losing their support. Zelenskyy fired 9 top officials after reports that members of his government went on vacation to Spain and France and took bribes during the war. Zelenskyy has pledged to take a zero-tolerance approach to corruption in Ukraine. That's exactly the right approach, but it's tough because after 70 years of Soviet corruption, that's kind of been part of drummed into the culture. 4 deputy ministers and 5 regional governors were sacked by Ukraine's cabinet on Tuesday. Ukraine's deputy prosecutor general Olensky Semenko also announced his resignation on the same day. Ukraine would see, quote, no return to the way things used to be, Zelenskyy said in his nightly address, adding that in the coming week there would be time of appropriate decisions. So they're looking at it, they're figuring out what needs to be done. Now, finally, Zelenskyy banned officials from traveling, as I just talked about, except when performing government duties, and he said if they want to rest now, they will rest outside the civil service. That's the right approach. It's a bad situation, but it could be worse if you didn't take care of it like they're taking care of it now. Now, I'm thinking about this whole cultural corruption kind of thing, and it happened to dovetail as I was reading Hannah Arendt's on revolution. And Arendt was talking about, she was looking at the parallel between the similarities and the differences between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And they were very different. They were very different in spirit, and they were very different in its consequence. The American Revolution went on to relative peace and stability with the Constitution. The French Revolution turned into a bloodbath and a counter-revolution and Napoleon and multiple constitutions and problem after problem after problem. But see, part of the difference was the Americans had this liberty and freedom and self-government in place for a long time. The French did not have that luxury. And when I say a long time, I mean a long time. We think about 1776 as the beginning of the American, experience. It really wasn't. It was really 1607. And in 1607, if you read the original charter, they had the rights of Englishmen, and they understood what the rights of Englishmen were. And they self-governed for 169 years. Remember, what happened in Ukraine is they've lived under the tyranny of Soviet systems for 70 or so years. And then they've been trying to work their way out of that over the last 30 or so, trying to work toward a Western understanding of, hey, how does this whole democracy and fair governance actually work? So it's different, and it's going to take a while for them to get themselves where they're trying to go. Now, moving to the EU is a great help because it's causing them to put in place legislation that is anti-corruption and properly geared judicially and those kinds of things. But it's still going to be there. But that doesn't mean you don't support them because there was some corruption somewhere along the way. In fact, they're doing the right thing by trying to root it out, and good on them for doing that in a very, very difficult time. Okay, folks, thanks for your time. If this was helpful to you, I would really appreciate it if you give me a like, share, subscribe. If you want to support me, you can buy me a coffee. And let me finish, as I always do, Dakuyu Shokyu Voliviaze za Ukrainiu. Thank you for cheering for Ukraine. See you tomorrow.